Hello, my friends. The Kremlin's response to Volodymyr Zelensky's Christmas address was not merely a matter of rhetorical irritation, it was diagnostic. When Zelensky used a holiday message to imply a wish for Vladimir Putin's demise, Moscow did not respond with theatrical outrage or reciprocal insults. Instead, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov dismissed the address as uncultured, bitter, and indicative of a political figure who may no longer be capable of rational decision-making. That response is revealing. It signals that Moscow increasingly views Zelensky not as a negotiating counterpart, but as a liability both to Ukraine and to any realistic diplomatic process. This framing matters because, at the same moment, Western and Ukrainian media were circulating reports that Zelensky was preparing a visit to Mar-a-Lago to meet Donald Trump. According to Ukrainian sources, this meeting, allegedly scheduled for late December, was to center on Zelensky's so-called 20-point peace plan, a document Kyiv claims could form the basis of a negotiated settlement before the new year. The White House did not confirm the meeting. That silence speaks volumes. From Moscow's perspective, the entire premise is flawed. Peace plans that exclude Russia from their formulation are not peace plans. They are internal Western messaging documents. Zelensky's 20 points, insofar as details have been made public, fail on the three pillars that actually determine war termination: territory, security guarantees, and reparations. On territory, the proposal oscillates between a frozen conflict along the current line of contact with a demilitarized zone imposed symmetrically on Russia and Ukraine, or an even more fantastical idea: transforming Donbass into a U.S.-supervised free economic zone. Both concepts are non-starters. Russia did not absorb Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson through constitutional processes and military sacrifice in order to hand effective control to Washington under a new label. On reparations, the plan gestures vaguely toward Russian financial responsibility, ignoring the obvious asymmetry of leverage. States that are losing wars do not extract reparations from those winning them. On security guarantees, Kyiv continues to float Article 5-style protections without NATO membership, a contradiction in terms. Guarantees without enforcement mechanisms are theater. Enforcement mechanisms without Russian consent are escalation. This is why the notion that Trump should or would be persuaded by such a presentation strains credibility. The more plausible interpretation is that the proposed Mar-a-Lago visit is not about peace at all. It is about optics. Zelensky needs to be seen engaging Trump in order to counter the growing perception in Europe and the United States that Washington's commitment to Project Ukraine is weakening. The visit, real or imagined, functions as a signal to Brussels. And Berlin, Ukraine is still relevant. The money pipeline must stay open. Crucially, all of this diplomatic choreography unfolds while Ukraine's internal political legitimacy erodes. Elections remain suspended. Zelensky governs under extended emergency powers. Advisors close to the presidency openly state that Ukraine cannot afford elections financially or politically. The estimated cost of a national vote, roughly $450 million, is framed as an unbearable burden for a state already dependent on external funding. The subtext is unmistakable. Sovereignty has become conditional on foreign underwriting. Polling data, when it leaks out, compounds the problem. Even favorable polls suggest Zelensky would struggle to survive a second round against military figures such as Valery Zaluzhny. This explains the persistent deferral of democratic processes and reinforces Moscow's long-standing argument that Kyiv's political system has drifted into managed rule sustained by Western capital rather than popular mandate. Against this backdrop, the question of strategic assets becomes central, none more so than the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, Europe's largest. Both Zelensky's 20-point plan and elements attributed to Trump-aligned proposals converge on a remarkable idea: transferring operational or managerial control of the ZNPP to the United States. In one version, Washington would jointly manage the plant with Russian and Ukrainian participation. In another, Russia would simply hand it over as part of a goodwill gesture. From Moscow's standpoint, this borders on the absurd. Yet President Putin's recent remarks, as reported by Russian business media, suggest something more calculated is unfolding. According to those reports, U.S. envoys expressed interest in the plant not merely as an energy asset, but as infrastructure for large-scale cryptocurrency mining, leveraging nuclear baseload power for digital extraction. Whether this is literal or illustrative, the implication is stark. Western proposals increasingly treat Ukrainian territory and infrastructure as modular components in global financial and technological schemes, not as sovereign national assets. Meanwhile, the military reality on the ground continues to diverge from Western narratives. Russian forces maintain steady pressure across multiple axes, particularly in the Zaporozhye region. Advances around Guliai-Pol have forced Ukrainian units into rapid withdrawals, leaving behind equipment, documentation, and fortified positions taken largely intact. These are not the signs of a force executing orderly, confident defense. They are the markers of attritional exhaustion. In Kupiansk, fighting remains intense. Ukrainian sources speak of counterattacks and localized gains. Russian reports emphasize defensive success and heavy Ukrainian losses. Both can be true tactically, but strategically the pattern remains unchanged. Ukraine expends manpower and materiel to contest positions of diminishing strategic value, while Russia preserves escalation, dominance, and depth. Odessa has again come under Russian strike pressure, reinforcing a broader operational shift. For the first time in a sustained manner, Russian forces appear to be targeting rail and logistics corridors linking Poland to the Ukrainian front. These corridors have functioned as Ukraine's arterial lifelines for Western weapons deliveries. Their disruption, even intermittently, complicates Kyiv's ability to rotate forces, resupply artillery, and integrate new systems. That such measures were not pursued aggressively earlier only underscores Moscow's patience and its confidence that time, not tempo, is the decisive variable. Perhaps the most ominous signal comes from Moscow's assessment of Ukraine's manpower crisis. Russian Foreign Ministry statements suggest Kyiv is preparing for mass mobilization on a scale approaching 2 million personnel in early 2026. If accurate, this would involve eliminating most remaining exemptions and forcibly expanding conscription. Whether or not the exact figure materializes, the direction is clear. States that mobilize at that scale are not preparing for victory. They are attempting to delay defeat. War, at its core, is an accounting exercise of territory, resources, legitimacy, and human endurance. On each ledger, Ukraine's position weakens while Russia's stabilizes. Moscow no longer needs to rush outcomes or chase diplomatic illusions. It can afford to wait while Western unity frays, Ukrainian political cohesion decays, and the battlefield imposes its own verdict. This is why Kremlin responses now sound restrained rather than furious. Russia is not reacting, it is observing. Zelensky's rhetoric, Western peace plans drafted in isolation, and last-minute diplomatic theater do not alter the underlying equation. Wars end when realities are acknowledged, not when slogans are refined. Until Kyiv and its sponsors confront that truth, the conflict will continue along lines already drawn not by press releases, but by power. And power, increasingly, lies with Russia. To understand Moscow's current posture, one has to abandon the Western habit of treating Russian statements as propaganda rather than policy signals. For Russia, words follow structure. When the Kremlin dismisses Zelensky as irrational or politically degraded, it is not an insult. It is a classification. In Russian strategic culture, negotiations are only meaningful if the counterpart possesses both authority and continuity. Zelensky increasingly has neither. Authority requires legitimacy. Continuity requires time. Zelensky's mandate has expired in everything but name. Elections remain suspended indefinitely, and decision-making is visibly outsourced to foreign capitals. From Moscow's vantage point, Ukraine is no longer a sovereign negotiating actor, but an administrative zone managed through Western consensus. You cannot sign a durable peace with an administrator whose instructions may change after the next election cycle in Washington or Brussels. This is why Russia has quietly shifted from a negotiation-first posture to a conditions-first posture. Moscow is no longer asking, what compromise can we reach? It is asking, what realities must exist before compromise becomes rational? That is a fundamentally different question, and it explains why Russian officials appear unmoved by peace plans drafted without Russian participation. Zelensky's 20-point plan fails not because it is insufficiently detailed, but because it is conceptually inverted. It assumes Russia must be incentivized to stop. Moscow does not see itself as needing incentives. Russia sees itself as resolving a strategic vulnerability created over 3 decades, NATO's eastward absorption of former Soviet space, and the transformation of Ukraine into a forward military platform. From that perspective, territory is not bargaining currency, it is outcome. The incorporation of Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson is not provisional in Russian law or political psychology. These regions are treated the same way Crimea was after 2014, as settled facts backed by constitutional amendment, demographic integration, and military control. No Russian leadership, Putin or otherwise, could reverse that without triggering internal political collapse. Western analysts who frame territorial concessions as confidence-building measures misunderstand Russian domestic reality entirely. Security guarantees, likewise, are interpreted differently in Moscow than in Washington. The West speaks of guarantees as legal documents. Russia speaks of guarantees as force relationships. A neutral Ukraine without foreign troops, foreign intelligence infrastructure, or foreign missile systems is a guarantee. A Ukraine armed, financed, and trained by NATO under a different acronym is not. This is where the Western fixation on paper solutions becomes almost comical. Demilitarized zones, frozen conflicts, monitoring missions, these are tools for managing ceasefires between roughly equal parties. Russia does not view the current conflict as one between equals. It views it as a delayed correction of an imbalance that emerged after 1991 and metastasized after 2014. The Zaporozhye nuclear power plant illustrates this mindset perfectly. Western discourse treats the plant as a bargaining chip, a shared asset, or even a technocratic problem to be solved by international management. Moscow treats it as strategic infrastructure located on Russian-controlled territory. Any proposal that places operational control in American hands, whether for energy redistribution or cryptocurrency mining, is interpreted not as pragmatism but as extraction. It reinforces Russia's belief that Western engagement with Ukraine is not about stability, but about asset capture. This belief is not theoretical. From Moscow's view, Ukraine's post-2014 trajectory reads like a case study in externalization. Foreign debt underwriting state functions, foreign advisors shaping policy, foreign weapons determining battlefield tempo, and foreign media defining legitimacy. Russia sees a state hollowed out and repurposed as a buffer, not a nation empowered to choose neutrality. On the battlefield, this perception is reinforced daily. Russian operations prioritize sustainability over spectacle. Advances are measured, often unglamorous, but cumulative. Ukrainian withdrawals, whether from positions around Goliaipol or elsewhere, are not framed in Moscow as breakthroughs, but as indicators of systemic strain. The fact that Ukrainian units are abandoning equipment and documentation speaks to compression under pressure, not tactical redeployment. Kupiansk, Zaporozhye, Odessa, these names matter less individually than collectively. They map a conflict where Ukraine must contest everywhere, while Russia can choose where to apply force. That asymmetry is decisive. It is why Russia can afford to experiment, such as selectively targeting rail corridors from Poland, while Ukraine must react to every shift with diminishing reserves. Manpower is the final brutal variable. Western commentary often avoids this topic because it resists spin. Russia has demographic depth, industrial mobilization, and political tolerance for prolonged conflict. Ukraine has none of those at scale. The discussion of mass mobilization, whether 2 million or fewer, is significant, not for the number, but for the admission. When a state contemplates total mobilization, it signals that voluntary participation has collapsed and that social exhaustion is setting in. From Moscow's analytical lens, this is the beginning of the endgame. Not a dramatic collapse, not a cinematic victory parade, but an erosion of Ukraine's ability to function as a coherent warfighting entity. Russia does not need Kyiv to surrender. It needs Ukraine to accept limits and for the West to stop pretending those limits are negotiable. This is why Russian rhetoric has cooled rather than escalated. The Kremlin is not rushing to conclude the war because it sees no strategic urgency. Time degrades Ukraine faster than Russia. Western unity is conditional. Russian strategic objectives are not. Leadership changes in Washington may alter tone, but they do not alter geography. In short, Moscow believes the war has already crossed its decisive threshold. What remains is consolidation, not compromise. Peace will come not through summits, plans, or photo opportunities, but through recognition of facts created on the ground and sustained over time. History favors those who shape reality rather than narrate it. Russia is doing the former. The West, increasingly, is doing the latter. What has become increasingly obvious over the last year, and especially over the last 24 hours of Western media commentary, is the degree to which fantasy has replaced reality among influential voices shaping Western perceptions of the Russia-Ukraine war. This is not a marginal phenomenon. These are not fringe commentators shouting from the sidelines. These are former intelligence officials, defense analysts, and policy insiders whose words echo dangerously close to centers of power in Washington. When such people misrepresent reality, the consequences are not academic, they are lethal. Take, for example, the recent comments by Dan Hoffman, a former CIA officer, who confidently asserted that Ukraine is negotiating in good faith while Russia wages a forever war, refuses peace, and suffers catastrophic economic and manpower collapse. This narrative is not merely inaccurate, it is demonstrably false, and Hoffman knows it. There is no charitable interpretation available here. Vladimir Putin's alleged refusal to negotiate is not a misunderstanding. It is a fabrication. Russia has pursued diplomatic engagement relentlessly and continuously since before the conflict escalated. Senior Russian officials, including Putin himself, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and other top diplomatic figures have repeatedly articulated terms, frameworks, and conditions for negotiation. High-level meetings between Russian and American leadership did not occur in a vacuum, nor did the numerous mid-level and senior diplomatic engagements that followed. To claim Russia has never shown interest in peace requires either deliberate dishonesty or total detachment from documented reality. Yet this lie works because of how it is delivered. It appears in 3-minute television segments consumed passively by audiences who are not encouraged to examine detail, context, or history. Most viewers will never encounter a sustained analysis that dismantles these claims. They hear the assertion, absorb it, and move on to the next scandal, the next headline, the next distraction. That is how narratives win, even when they are false. Equally dishonest is the portrayal of Ukraine, specifically Volodymyr Zelensky, as a sincere peacemaker obstructed only by Russian intransigence. Nothing in Ukraine's negotiating posture has meaningfully changed since before Donald Trump re-entered office. Zelensky's so-called concessions are rhetorical repackagings of positions he has held for years. The proposed demilitarized zones, the talk of withdrawals, the 20-point plans, none of these address Russia's core security demands. Instead, they are tactical maneuvers designed to extract territorial retreat from Russia under the guise of negotiation. From Ukraine's perspective, this behavior is understandable. Any state facing military defeat would attempt to leverage diplomacy to regain territory. That instinct is rational. What is irrational and catastrophic is persisting in that strategy long after it has become clear that it will fail. Russia will not withdraw from territory it controls militarily from a position of strength, No state in history has done so. Expecting Russia to behave differently is not optimism, it is delusion. This war is governed by power asymmetry, not rhetoric. Russia holds the strategic advantage in manpower, industrial capacity, economic resilience, and military depth. Ukraine does not. Negotiations conducted as if these facts do not exist are not negotiations. They are fantasies with a body count. And the body count is real. Ukraine is no longer merely conscripting. It is forcibly extracting men from streets, shops, homes, feeding them into a war it cannot win. This is not courage. It is desperation masquerading as resolve. Continuing such a war under these conditions is not noble resistance. It is the systematic destruction of a nation's future. The dishonesty does not stop there. Rebecca Grant, another prominent Western voice, recently dismissed even the notion that Russia holds military superiority. According to her, Russia is losing. Putin is running out of men. The Russian economy is collapsing. Ukraine is mostly holding the ground. This claim collapses under the weight of basic facts. Russia has a population of roughly 140 million people. It possesses vast industrial infrastructure and an economy that by multiple Western estimates ranks among the largest in the world. Ukraine's economy, by contrast, survives on external life support. It required massive European loans simply to continue functioning. Its domestic production base has been shattered. Its manpower crisis is existential. If Russia were truly losing, the map would reflect it. It does not. Bakhmut fell, Avdiivka fell, Soledar fell, Marinka is gone, Chasiv Yar is collapsing. Every Ukrainian counteroffensive from Kursk to Krinky has ended the same way. Initial penetration followed by attritional annihilation. Territory temporarily seized is eventually retaken by Russian forces, often at catastrophic Ukrainian cost. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops have been expended in operations that produced no lasting strategic gain. This is not a series of disconnected battles. It is a war of attrition. And wars of attrition are won not by dramatic gestures, but by reserves, logistics, and endurance. Ukraine no longer possesses strategic reserves. Its forces are shuffled laterally to plug gaps, weakening the entire front. Russia does not face this constraint. Western intelligence assessments, not Russian propaganda, indicate hundreds of thousands of Russian troops remain uncommitted, allowing rotation, reinforcement, and escalation at times of Moscow's choosing. Even Zelensky himself has acknowledged the buildup of approximately 120,000 Russian troops along sections of the Eastern Front, forces that have not yet been committed. Whether Russia uses them in a decisive offensive or simply holds them as strategic leverage is irrelevant. The fact remains, Russia dictates the tempo. Ukraine reacts. Western analysts frequently mock Russia's slow advance, noting that territorial gains appear modest. This misses the nature of the conflict entirely. Attritional warfare is not measured in kilometers per month. It is measured in which side can replace losses faster, sustain production longer, and absorb pressure without collapse. On every one of these metrics, Russia holds the advantage. The tragedy, perhaps the greatest tragedy, is that many Western leaders understand this reality perfectly. Despite their public rhetoric, they know Ukraine has already lost, yet they persist, because prolonging the war serves other interests. As long as Russian soldiers die, the war is deemed worthwhile. Ukraine is not a partner in this logic. It is a tool. The Ukrainian people believe Western support exists to save their country. In truth, they are being expended, they are being sacrificed so that Western elites can weaken Russia without risking their own populations. Fight to the last Ukrainian is not a slogan, it is policy. When Ukraine finally collapses, the same voices will pivot seamlessly. They will point to the devastation and declare moral outrage. They will demand more spending, more militarization, more confrontation, citing Russian aggression as justification. The dead Ukrainians will be transformed into rhetorical capital. This strategy works only as long as the war remains geographically contained. Escalation, whether through provocation, miscalculation, or accident, changes everything. If Western forces become directly involved, the cost will no longer be abstract. It will not be measured in Ukrainian lives alone. That is what is at stake. There is no guarantee this conflict remains limited. History offers no comfort on that front. And once escalation occurs, no amount of moral posturing will undo it. I do not possess the power to end this war. What I can do and what must be done is to expose falsehoods, challenge manufactured narratives, and insist on reality. Truth does not require loyalty. It requires courage. The war can end, but it will not end on terms dictated by fantasy. It will end when Western leaders abandon arrogance, acknowledge power dynamics, and stop using Ukraine as a disposable proxy. Until then, the attrition continues, and the cost, human, moral, and strategic, continues to rise. That is where we are.